My dear listeners, today I'm going to tell you about one of history's greatest and most complex battles, the Trojan War. Come closer, closer still, so you can fully immerse yourself in this tale. Close your eyes and imagine that cool Mediterranean evening when the wind was battering Troy's high walls, the salty smell of the sea stinging your nose, the waves crashing against the base of the walls, and those immense stone structures glowing in the dark. Now we're going back hundreds of years, into the realm of time, boundaries, and forgotten legends. Troy. Troy. That magnificent city rising in the heart of Asia, at the crossroads of trade routes, surrounded on all sides by the sea. It was a city coveted even by mighty kings and gods. No matter how strong Troy's walls were, it could not escape the cruel wheel of fate. So what sparked this war? Was it just a woman, or was it an unavoidable destiny that even the gods intervened in? It all started with a wedding where gods and mortals mingled, the wedding of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. Yes, everything was there at that grand feast, except one thing: chaos itself. The goddess of discord, Eris, wasn't invited. Oh, dear friends, who invites chaos itself? But Eris came, bringing with her that cursed golden apple. What was written on it? To the fairest, and with that, sparks of fire began flying. Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena. The words on that apple ignited a conflict among the goddesses. Each wanted the apple, but it was hard to decide. No goddess was less beautiful than the other. Paris. The delicate prince of Troy, young and somewhat naive, he was chosen, my dear friends, to make this difficult decision among the goddesses. Oh, poor Paris. Aphrodite promised him something: the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. And here the web of fate began to weave, my friends. Paris chose Aphrodite and set off to Greece to claim his prize. Helen, the woman whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. Paris abducted her to Troy. And so the world's bloodiest and most epic war began. But this war wasn't just about Helen's beauty. Oh, there was so much more. Menelaus declared war on Troy. But this wasn't a personal battle, it was a conflict involving gods and kings, armies and empires. Ships gathered from all over Greece, each with its own mighty, brave warriors. Achilles' rage, Odysseus' cunning, Agamemnon's leadership. Imagine that vast army gathered on the sea, each one sworn to battle, to shed blood, to restore honor, and of course to bring Helen back. But Troy wasn't an easy target, my dear listeners. Behind its high walls, brave warriors and wise kings awaited. King Priam, that noble and aged king, was ready to do whatever it took to protect his city. Prince Hector. Hector, the city's brave hero, his father's pride, Troy's last hope. Facing him was Achilles, feared even by the immortal gods. Thus, my friends, the fates of gods and mortals intertwined in the midst of this war. It was as much a story of love as it was of betrayal and honor. Now I'll take you to that battle. The seas are fierce, the winds are harsh. Close your eyes, dear friends. We're about to embark on a journey toward Troy's magnificent walls. Because this story doesn't end here, no, it's just beginning. There's so much more to tell, so many secrets to uncover. Even the stars shining in the dark of night seem to have fallen silent to listen to this story. I invite you to listen to the grand and tragic tale of the Trojan War. If you're ready, let's dive into the depths of that magical battle and the ancient lands of Troy. My dear friends, now I'm going to take you on a journey through time. But this journey isn't to a castle or a battlefield. Instead, it's a trip into the depths of the human mind, to the very origins of myths and legends. To understand why and how the Trojan War started, we first need to explore that enchanting mythological world. It's a world where gods, heroes, and mortals all dance together on the delicate threads of fate. And this story can't be told without Homer's immortal epic, the Iliad, because the Iliad is the soul and heart of the Trojan War. So let me take you into the depths of this great conflict between gods and humans. It all begins in those legendary times when gods and mortals lived together. Oh, what a magical era it was, my dear listeners. People would pray to the gods and build temples. The gods, in turn, guided humans and determined their fates. Olympus, where Zeus reigned from his majestic throne, was a place where gods and goddesses played, plotted, and saw human lives as mere games. The Iliad starts here, with a story woven from the gods' intrigues and human flaws. It all starts with a wedding, the wedding of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. Imagine, dear friends, the moment when the gods were invited and that magnificent feast was set. Every god and goddess, from Zeus to Hera, from Aphrodite to Athena, attended this grand celebration. But there was one goddess who wasn't invited, Eris, the goddess of discord and chaos. Oh, friends, who invites chaos to a wedding? But Eris wanted revenge and left a golden apple at the feast. It had just 3 words written on it: to the fairest. This apple, though it looked like a harmless fruit, actually sparked a huge conflict among the goddesses. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each of them believed the apple was rightfully theirs. Zeus chose to stay out of the mess and gave the task of making this tough decision to a mortal, Paris, the young and handsome prince of Troy. What did Paris choose? He picked Aphrodite because Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. And that choice was the first spark of the Trojan War. Paris took Helen from her husband Menelaus and brought her to Troy, and so the flames of war spread from Olympus to Troy. But my dear friends, this war wasn't just about a woman being taken. Oh no, Homer's immortal Iliad describes how the war was actually started to test the power of the gods and human will. Homer, that wise poet who might have been an old storyteller with poor eyesight. But he was the kind of storyteller who created an epic that would echo through the ages. The Iliad covers only the last few weeks of the war, but in that brief time frame, it tells one of the most captivating stories in human history. The Iliad takes us to the heart of this great war between gods and mortals. It reveals the start of the war, the courage, anger, flaws, and tragic fates of the heroes. It's an epic where words almost come alive, my dear friends. When Hector's sword gleams in the air and Achilles' rage surges like waves, you feel like you're right there. Behind Troy's majestic walls, you feel every moment of the battle deep within you. But the real story behind the war is the struggle between the gods and humans with fate. The war that began with Paris choosing Aphrodite was not about a woman's beauty, but rather a result of the inevitable destinies of gods and humans. Even Zeus couldn't oppose fate, which had already written Troy's destruction. If even the gods couldn't stop Troy's fall, what does human power mean? Yes, my dear friends, this war started with the abduction of a woman, but it was a war that redefined humanity's fate and the power of the gods. Homer's Iliad shows only one side of the Trojan War. But this side delves so deeply into the mythological and historical context of the war that anyone listening feels like they're part of it. The clash of gods and heroes is a manifestation of human weaknesses and the gods' ambitions. And so, dear listeners, the mythological and historical roots of the Trojan War are hidden in this epic. Now we'll move on to explore this great war in more depth in the next chapter. Sit a bit closer to the fire because we have many more stories to tell. Ah, my dear friends. Now I'm going to take you into the shadow of Mount Olympus, right into the heart of that great conflict among the gods. Believe it or not, there were times when even the gods were as jealous and ambitious as humans. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the cornerstones of the Trojan War, the famous Golden Apple myth, judged by Paris. But first, close your eyes and imagine. The wedding preparations are complete, the festive fires are lit, and all the gods are gathered together. It all starts at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. Peleus was a mortal hero, and Thetis was a sea goddess. Even the gods were amazed by the union of these two different worlds. On the summit of Mount Olympus, a massive feast was set up. The gods drank nectar from golden cups and ate ambrosia, the divine food, from silver plates. Zeus, the mighty king, sat on his throne, and the gods and goddesses sang and danced joyfully. But there was one goddess who wasn't invited, Eris, the goddess of discord and chaos. Oh, friends, who invites chaos to a peaceful wedding? Eris was furious about not being invited. For her, the greatest pleasure was disrupting peace, and so she came up with a devilish plan. She threw a golden apple among the guests. It had only 3 words written on it to the fairest. Oh, my dear friends, everything started right here, with the fall of this seemingly simple apple. Suddenly, the goddesses started looking at each other. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each thought the apple belonged to her. Each believed she was the fairest of them all. Even Zeus preferred to stay out of this dangerous situation because he didn't want to anger the goddesses. So what should be done? Which goddess would truly be the rightful owner of the apple? And then Zeus had a brilliant idea. He decided to leave the responsibility of this risky decision to a mortal. That mortal was Paris, the young prince of Troy. Paris, handsome, graceful, and clever. But unfortunately, he was also unlucky enough to get entangled in the gods' games. One day, while Paris was tending sheep on Mount Ida, the gods appeared to him. They called him, and, at Zeus's command, asked him to decide who the golden apple belonged to. Poor Paris. He didn't even realize the weight of the decision he was about to make. In front of Paris stood 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each claimed the apple for herself and made various promises to win Paris's favor. Hera offered him power and authority. She said, "If you choose me, you'll rule over Asia and Europe." Athena, as the goddess of war, promised him wisdom and victory in battle. "Choose me, Paris, and you'll be undefeated in all wars," she whispered. Aphrodite, on the other hand, made a more cunning offer. She promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. Oh, Paris, poor Paris. He couldn't resist Aphrodite's allure and gave her the golden apple. And right here, my dear friends, the web of fate began to weave. Paris's choice planted the seeds of enmity among the goddesses and sparked the first flame of the Trojan War. The woman promised by Aphrodite, Helen, was the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Paris kidnapped Helen and brought her to Troy. And thus the seeds of that terrible war stretching from Greece to Troy were sown. But my dear listeners, remember that this wasn't just about a human choice. The gods were involved, and the web of fate was intricately woven. Hera and Athena were furious with Paris for choosing Aphrodite. These 2 powerful goddesses became Troy's enemies and were burning with the desire for revenge. And Aphrodite, by supporting Troy, promised protection to Paris. By making this choice, Paris set in motion a fate that even the gods couldn't oppose. Yes, what started with the fall of an apple turned into a war full of blood and tears. A 10-year siege at Troy's gates, the death of heroes, the clash of gods. And so, my friends, it all began with this golden apple myth. Now, if you want to know what happens next in this story, sit a little closer to the fire. Because Paris's choice not only changed the struggle among the gods, but also altered the course of history. And this story is just beginning. Ah, my dear listeners. Now, I'm going to tell you about one of the most dramatic and exciting moments in history. It was a moment so intense that even the gods couldn't resist interfering in human fate. Paris, that unfortunate prince of Troy, set his destiny in motion when he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite. And now we'll continue with the story of Paris's great love, the abduction of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen. Oh, Helen. Her beauty was legendary. The elegant wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, she was the most admired queen in Greece. This woman, promised to Paris by Aphrodite, was renowned not only for her beauty but also for her intelligence and nobility. But fate being what it is, Helen ignited a flame of passion in Paris's eyes. The Trojan prince, enchanted by Aphrodite's magic, became a slave to his love for Helen. But this love, my friends, was more than just a bond between two hearts. It was a fate written by the gods. Paris went to Sparta. On the surface, he appeared as a diplomatic envoy from Troy, but he was there to fulfill Aphrodite's promise. Menelaus welcomed Paris into his palace with great hospitality. But my friends, Paris's heart was not warm enough to appreciate this hospitality. He was spellbound by Aphrodite's allure and burning with love for Helen. The fire in his heart turned into a sparkle in his eyes, which he saw reflected in Helen's gaze. According to the legend, when Paris and Helen first saw each other, time seemed to stand still. Helen held her breath in awe of Paris's handsomeness and charm. Aphrodite's magic was so powerful that it sparked a flame in Helen's heart as well. Just a few exchanged glances were enough to start weaving the threads of destiny. And dear friends, Paris said to Helen, "Come with me to Troy. There I will welcome you with golden palaces, and you will be the queen of Troy." Helen's mind was in turmoil, and her heart began to race. And then one night. That fateful night. Under the dark veil that covered Sparta, Helen fled the palace through a secret door with Paris. Under Aphrodite's protection, Paris took Helen to Troy. Their ships set sail on the Aegean Sea, the wind swelling their sails like Aphrodite's breath and lighting their way. But my dear listeners, Paris and Helen's escape was not just between two lovers. Their flight sparked a fire that would blaze into a great conflagration in the Greek world. When Menelaus learned that Helen had been abducted, he was filled with rage. His heart was broken, his pride wounded. Losing Helen was not just a personal loss, it was an insult, a challenge to the entire Greek world. Menelaus immediately went to his brother Agamemnon. Agamemnon, my friends, was one of the most powerful kings of Greece and the mighty ruler of Mycenae. Menelaus could not forgive this insult, and he decided to unite all of Greece for war to avenge his brother. At that time, Greece was divided into various city-states, each with its own ruler and rules. However, under Agamemnon's leadership and Menelaus's justified fury, the entire Greek world decided to unite against Troy. From Sparta to Athens, from Argos to Corinth, every ruler prepared to send their soldiers and ships to Troy. Because, friends, this was not just about retrieving a woman, it was about defending Greek honor and taking revenge that was rightfully earned even in the eyes of the gods. Thus, all the heroes of Greece came together. Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, Diomedes. Each with their own army gathered under Agamemnon's leadership for a great campaign against Troy. Greek ships filled the waters of the Aegean, warriors donned their swords, and sacrifices were made to the gods. Because this great campaign would turn into a war not only among humans but also among gods. It was clear that even Zeus would not remain indifferent to this war. And so, dear friends, the sparks of the Trojan War were ignited. Paris's love and Helen's abduction brought war to the gates of a vast empire. But remember, this is just the beginning. There are many more stories written in blood to come before the high walls of Troy. Gather around the fire, for the continuation of this grand saga is not yet finished. My dear listeners, we've reached that grand moment that ignited the war. The winds at the gates of Troy are now heralding a storm. Greek ships are moving through the vast waters of the Aegean. They're so packed that the sea seems to be covered by a dark shroud. These ships are not just wooden vessels, each is filled with courageous hearts burning with the fire of revenge. So how did this grand campaign begin, And how did the Greek warriors come together? Let me tell you about those epic days. The preparations for this grand campaign against Troy began with a call heard from all corners of Greece. Agamemnon, the mighty king of Mycenae, stood by his brother Menelaus and declared war for this dishonor. But dear friends, it wasn't an easy task. Each city-state had its own king, pride, and interests. Agamemnon had to use his intelligence and leadership skills to bring all these leaders together. He made sacrifices to the gods, sent envoys, and persuaded each one to unite against Troy. But Agamemnon's efforts weren't just diplomatic. He played all his cards. Achilles, the son of Peleus, a demigod and the greatest warrior known. It was nearly impossible to go on this campaign without convincing him. Achilles was a hero who would win great victories before the walls of Troy, and his absence would weaken the Greek army. So Agamemnon made the greatest promises to Achilles' victory, glory, fame, and spoils. But Achilles wasn't just after these things. For him, this campaign was a test prepared by fate, a quest for a kind of immortality. With Achilles' participation, the Greek army gained tremendous power. But there were other heroes too, my friends. Odysseus, the clever and cunning king of Ithaca, needed to be part of this campaign for its strategic brilliance. Ajax, a strong and brave warrior, would be at the forefront of the first wave advancing towards Troy's walls. Each king and warrior gathered under Agamemnon's banner and decided to march against Troy. This united force gathered soldiers and ships from every corner of Greece. My dear friends, the Aegean Sea had never seen such a large fleet that year. The massive army gathered at the port of Aulis was so enormous that it cast a dark shadow over the sea. Agamemnon made sacrifices to the gods, prayed for their support in the war. However, my friends, the gods' plans were far more complex than human ones. At this moment, an unfortunate event occurred. While the Greek ships were waiting at Aulis, the winds refused to blow. The sea was as still as if the gods had held their breath. The heroes were impatient, and the soldiers were restless. Some gods did not support this war, and dear friends, this is where the wrath of the goddess Artemis came into play. Agamemnon had made a mistake that angered Artemis during a hunt, and Artemis had stopped the winds to prevent the Greek army from setting sail. The army waited for weeks. Their patience was wearing thin. And so a seer told Agamemnon that he had to make a sacrifice to appease Artemis's wrath. This sacrifice, dear friends, was the life of the king's beloved daughter Iphigenia. Agamemnon, with a broken heart, made this dreadful decision. Iphigenia would be offered as a sacrifice to the goddess so that the winds could blow again and the Greek army could set sail. It's said that Artemis, at the last moment, changed Iphigenia into a deer and spared her life. But dear friends, this event cast a shadow over the heart of the Greek army and marked the beginning of tensions among the gods. Finally, the winds began to blow again, the seas roared, and the Greek ships, with their white sails, set out towards Troy. A naval force that was unprecedented in its power up to that time. Every warrior's heart was burning with the fire of victory and revenge. When the walls of Troy became visible, those high and strong walls appeared as a mountain to the Greek warriors. But my friends, these warriors feared neither a mountain nor the gods. For what they sought was not just victory, it was a struggle to write their own destiny. Thus, dear listeners, the first sparks of the Trojan War were ignited. When the Greek warriors arrived at the golden gates of Troy, the war was truly underway. Both sides were preparing. Fear and hope were intertwined on the walls of Troy, while the Greek camp was filled with the silence of victory and revenge. But this silence was the calm before the storm. And so, dear friends, the great clashes of the Trojan War are approaching. The heroes of both sides are ready to write this epic tale, even with the gods watching closely. Gather around the fire, for the story of this war is just beginning. Ah, my dear friends, this time I'll take you to the ancient city of Troy, to the plains where the Achaeans fought and the shadows of its massive walls. Troy. Even its name has echoed through the centuries, whispered from ear to ear, and found its place in poems and legends. But to understand the war, you must first understand the story of this city. So let's wander through the heart of Troy, walk its stone streets, and feel the spirit of this city. Troy, or Troia. It was built on a high and solid hill where the winds carrying the scent of the sea hit the northwestern coast of Asia. It was very close to what we now call the Dardanelles, or Hellespont. The Hellespont is a narrow strait that connects the cool waters of the Aegean Sea to the deep blue waters of the Black Sea. This narrow strait was the key to trade and wealth, my friends. Troy was located at this strategic point, right at the heart of both the Aegean and Asia. This position made Troy both rich and a target. But Troy was different not just because of its location, but also because of its culture. You could find all the beauty of nature here, the endless blue of the sea, the green coolness of the plains, and the majestic rise of the hills. Troy wasn't just a city surrounded by stone walls, it was also a symbol of a civilization shaped by its people's efforts. The sweet waters from the foothills of Mount Ida gave life to the city, while the winds that swept through its streets rustled the leaves of the olive trees. And my friends, the stories carried by this wind would determine the fate of the people of that time. The Trojans were a people right in the middle of East and West, carrying characteristics of both worlds. Their lives were like an epic written anew every day. The people of this city were both warriors and artists. They lived as favorites of the gods on the sacred lands of Mount Ida. It is said that Troy's relationship with the gods was stronger than that of other cities. Apollo and Athena were known as the city's protectors, and it was believed that the city's walls were built by these gods themselves. With the power of these gods behind them, the walls of Troy were magnificent, my friends. Those walls were where even the stones seemed to speak, and the winds whispered stories. Troy was a rich trade center. Silks from the east, wines and olive oils from the west all met and were exchanged here. The markets were colorful and lively, filled with merchants and artisans. In this hustle and bustle, the people of Troy preserved their cultural heritage accumulated over thousands of years. They didn't just grow rich through trade, but also through art. Trojan artists were skilled in stone carving and pottery. In fact, Troy was famous for its unique pottery and ornaments. These items were so beautiful and delicate that they seemed to shine as if they were made by the gods themselves. However, my friends, what made Troy truly meaningful was the spirit of its people. No matter how rich and magnificent Troy became, its people were always known as brave, honorable, and resilient. They considered these lands sacred and cherished every stone and tree in their hearts. That's why Troy was not just a city, but also a belief, a passion, and a sense of belonging. And remember, my friends, Troy didn't just host humans, it was also home to gods. Especially the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Apollo had a special interest in the Trojans. It is said that Zeus's view of Troy from his heavenly palace was unlike any other city. The Trojans lived out their faith in the gods in their grand temples. The Temple of Apollo, with its golden columns and high dome, was dazzling. People offered sacrifices and prayed here. Especially on days when the shadow of war fell over the Trojans, the prayers made in the temples were said to become fiery appeals rising to the heavens. But my friends, Troy's wealth and beauty also became the cause of envy and war. With the arrival of Helen, Troy became not just a city but the center of a war. The legendary story echoing through Troy's walls was whispered to everyone walking its streets and even caught the attention of the gods. Troy was the star of its time. Its geographical location and cultural richness made it an impregnable fortress. But this ancient city eventually became the stage for a great war. And, my dear friends, the stones, winds, and waves of Troy would keep their voices for thousands of years to remember this war. And so, within this mysterious atmosphere of Troy, as you walk through the city's streets, you can hear the voices of those who lived there. Behind every stone, every shadow, there's a story. Troy was not just a city, but a place where destinies began, fates were drawn, and the paths of gods and humans crossed. So, my dear friends, let's walk together through the mystical streets of Troy and continue to discover the secrets of this ancient city. Ah, dear listeners, come a little closer, let me see your faces in the firelight. I'll continue to tell you about Troy. Troy, that ancient city that was cherished by both gods and humans. But as we delve into Troy's story, we need to understand just how important its location was. Because, my friends, just as every city has a spirit, the place where that spirit resides has its own significance. Troy's location wasn't just a spot on the map, it was like a key that changed the course of history. So let's turn this key together and take a closer look at Troy's secret. Troy was located on the northwest coast of Asia, right on the edge of what is now the Dardanelles, at that magical point where the seas and lands met. You might ask, why was it so magical? Well, my friends, because this narrow strait was the gateway connecting the waves of the Aegean Sea to the cool waters of the Black Sea. And this gateway was on one of the most important trade routes of the time. Every ship, every trader, every caravan traveling from the Aegean to the Black Sea had to pass through Troy's outskirts. Just imagine ships laden with gold, caravans loaded with silks and spices. All of them passed through this sacred land. Troy's location gave it not only wealth but also strategic power. It was like a key opening the doors to both the west and the east. This position drew both friends and enemies to it. On one side, the Persians from the east, and on the other, the Achaeans from the west, had their eyes constantly on Troy. Whoever controlled this city held the junction between the east and the west. Troy also acted as a guardian, a shield controlling the strait, the Hellespont. Every ship passing through had to do so with the permission and knowledge of the Trojans. This strategic location turned Troy into a trade hub, a port city, but also a fortress, a garrison. In addition to its strategic importance, Troy's cultural richness and social structure were also quite remarkable. This city wasn't just a war city, it was also a cradle of civilization and culture. The Trojans were not only warriors but also great craftsmen. Their hands were so skilled that they turned everything they touched into art. Their legendary pottery, intricately carved stone works, and bronze artifacts were famous not just in Troy but in surrounding regions as well. Trojan artists believed they infused the spirit of the gods into each of their works. When you touched their pottery, you could almost feel the breath of the gods. And don't forget, dear friends, that Troy's social structure was another element adding strength to the city. The people of Troy were divided into classes, each with a specific place and role in society. At the top were the nobles, princes, and kings who governed the city. These kings were not only warriors but also responsible for maintaining justice and order. The highest king, in the eyes of the Trojans, was seen as both a leader and a sacred person who communicated with the gods. The most famous of these was undoubtedly Priam, the king of Troy. His justice and mercy had become legendary among the people. It is said that Priam's scales of justice always weighed correctly. But below the king, there were also warriors, traders, craftsmen, and farmers. The warriors were the most prominent class in Troy. These brave men who protected Troy's magnificent walls were the pride of the city. They were not just soldiers but also heroes. Trojan traders acted as a bridge between the east and west, bringing exotic goods from distant lands to Troy's markets. Craftsmen created unique works that beautified daily life in the city, allowing the Trojans to live immersed in art. Farmers worked the fertile lands of Troy, providing food for the Trojan people and meeting the city's food needs. Troy's governance was carried out under the leadership of a king by a council. The council was made up of the city's leading citizens, and these council members made decisions about the city's future. This council, where everyone's voice could be heard, was also a sign that Troy was not just a monarchy, but also had a form of democracy. The city's leaders, as representatives of the people, looked out for the city's interests in times of war and peace, making decisions according to the will of the gods. The people of Troy were tightly knit. They united against any threat from outside and fought to protect their city and their lives. Women, children, the elderly, everyone was a part of this great family. As you walked through the city streets, you could feel the bonds of friendship, cooperation, and solidarity among the people. Troy was protected not just by stone walls, but by the love and loyalty of its people. For them, Troy was more than just a city. It was a home, a homeland, an identity. And so, my dear friends, Troy's strategic location, cultural richness, and strong social structure made it both a target and a significant player on the historical stage. Troy was much more than a stone city. It was the spirit of a civilization, a culture, and a people. This city, which felt the breath of the gods, never lost its magic even as it was shaped by time and fate. That's why, dear friends, Troy was not just a city, it was a heartbeat in the veins of history, the birthplace of legends and epics, a magical place where gods and humans lived together. Let's delve even deeper into the secrets of this city and try to feel the spirit that continues to beat in the heart of Troy. Dear listeners, today I'll tell you about a pivotal moment in the history of Troy. This moment covers the early years of the Trojan War, the period of preparations and initial clashes. It's the story of the first steps toward war, the early battles, and the intricate dance of grand strategies, preparations, heroes from all corners of the continent, and unfolding events. So let's embark on a journey to those early years, pulled from the dusty shelves of time. Our story begins in those epic years when tensions were rising between two great powers. The grand conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans actually started long ago with Paris abducting Helen. But the repercussions of this event brought a storm that swept across the Mediterranean, leading to years of preparation. Now we step into the first tremors of this storm and the early years of the war. The Greeks embarked on a massive military preparation to conquer Troy. Each Greek city-state prepared for the grand campaign by selecting their strongest warriors, most skilled sailors, and bravest commanders. Some of the most famous Greek heroes were gathered for this war. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, was there, along with Odysseus, the clever Greek king, and Menelaus, Helen's husband, who was one of the biggest motivators for the war. These preparations weren't just military, they also involved strategic and logistical planning. The Greeks knew how difficult and complex the war would be. Therefore, they made significant efforts to strengthen their navy. They built a large fleet to reach Troy, which included some of the most powerful ships in the Greek navy. They anticipated that the great naval expedition to Troy would be fraught with challenges. So these preparations required tremendous organization both at sea and on land. On the other hand, Troy was also preparing. The city's defenses were reinforced with repairs to the walls and the development of new defense strategies. Troy's walls were made not just of stone but also of the courage of its heroes. Under Priam's rule, Troy's most experienced soldiers were ready to defend the city. Troy was also waiting for external aid. The city had many friends and allies who would join the fight to protect Troy from the Greeks. In short, Troy's defense involved not only physical but also strategic preparations. In the early years of the war, there were small skirmishes and tests. The Greeks conducted raids around Troy, targeting the villages and allied regions surrounding the city. These initial clashes around Troy were signs of the larger battles to come. Both sides started these small conflicts to intimidate each other and showcase their strength. These skirmishes increased tension between the Greeks and Trojans, leading both sides to prepare more rigorously for the Great War. The Greeks doubled their efforts to control sea routes. They planned to besiege Troy from the sea, so sea raids and attacks around Troy increased. Troy's ports were protected against these naval assaults, and Troy's navy began to defend against Greek ship attacks. These naval conflicts were harbingers of the larger battles to come both at sea and on land. However, in these early years of the war, some trials and skirmishes led to a temporary peace between the Greeks and Trojans. This peace allowed both sides to complete their preparations for the Great War. Both sides acknowledged the magnitude and difficulty of the conflict, and during this period of peace, they had the chance to reassess their strategies and preparations. Dear friends, the early years of the war are remembered not only for the preparations but also for the strategies, plans, and planning involved. This complex process between Troy and the Greeks further heightened the scale and complexity of the Great War. During this period, Troy fought hard both at sea and on land. These struggles indicated that the war was approaching, and both sides were on the brink of a major confrontation. These early years were building blocks for the great historical significance and importance of the Trojan War. Now, dear listeners, we've shed light on the preparations and conflicts of the early years of the Trojan War. Let's dive deeper into how these preparations evolved into a great war and the role Troy played in it. Dear listeners, we've now reached a major turning point in the epic of the Trojan War. The arrival of the Greek fleet at the shores of Troy and the initial clashes of the war are moments of such significance that they have echoed through history. Let's dive into these moments with an exhilarating story, as if we're stepping back into those times. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing before the grand walls of Troy in that distant past. When the Greek fleet appeared off the coast of Troy, the waves on the sea seemed to rise like a sign heralding the inevitability of war. Thousands of years ago, those massive Greek ships were making their way to Troy with great determination from across the seas. This fleet, stretching as far as the eye could see, once again highlighted the scale and importance of the impending conflict. The Greek fleet was prepared as part of a grand strategic plan. Each ship was equipped specifically for war. This massive flotilla, composed of Cretan captains, Corinthian sailors, and Athenian warriors, was powerful enough to shake Troy to its core. Each ship, gleaming under the evening sun with its armor, was like a beacon signaling the inevitability of war. When the Greek fleet arrived at the shores of Troy, the first clashes began. Troy had been anticipating this moment, and the city's inhabitants were ready, waiting behind their walls for the war to erupt. The initial conflicts often took place at the boundary between land and sea. Greek ships launched attacks targeting Troy's harbors. These naval battles created an atmosphere of chaos combined with massive waves in the middle of the sea. The Iliad describes the first battles of this period. In Homer's epic, these battles become an arena filled with brave warriors and strategic maneuvers. The early sections of the Iliad stoke the flames of war with detailed accounts of the encounters between the Greeks and Trojans. On one side, Achilles shines as the greatest hero of the war, while Hector stands as Troy's hero at the forefront of the battle. In the depictions of the Iliad, Hector's struggle for Troy and his determination in defending the city stand out. Achilles' rage and its impact on the war's direction are also detailed. This played a crucial role in Troy's defense and influenced the course of the conflict. In the early years of the war, the clashes between the sides generally occurred in confined areas. These small skirmishes were seen as precursors to the larger conflict. However, these early battles helped both sides understand the magnitude and complexity of the war. This period was also marked by the first great heroes, major conflicts, and significant victories. The role of each warrior and commander in the fate of this war was crucial. These clashes not only defined the battle between the Greeks and Trojans, but also set the stage for the meaning of wars throughout history and the place of great heroes. Dear listeners, the arrival of the Greek fleet at Troy and the initial clashes were not just the beginning of a great war, but also a historical turning point. The strategies, preparations, and heroism of both sides created the epic story of the Trojan War. Now, let's move beyond these clashes at Troy's walls and delve into the later stages of the war, where heroism deepens even further. Dear listeners, it's time to delve into the heart of the Trojan War, to explore the stories of its brave and powerful warriors. Achilles and Hector stand out as the most significant characters of this grand conflict, their stories shining like two stars in the fire of war. Let's take a closer look at the lives of these two great heroes and their roles in shaping the course of the battle. First, close your eyes and imagine yourself on the battlefield of Troy, amidst the glinting armor under the sun and the roar of battle cries. Here, the stories of two heroes who led the war and determined its course await us: Achilles and Hector. Achilles was known as the greatest warrior of the Greek army and its mightiest hero. However, his story wasn't just about battle, it was also shaped by anger, pride, and destiny. Achilles was the son of the sea nymph Thetis and Peleus, making him part divine, and thus he was called a demigod. But these divine traits didn't mean he was free from human suffering. Achilles was revered as the greatest hero of the war, and at the heart of his story was how his rage and pride altered the course of the battle. In the early years of the war, Achilles' courage and strength on the battlefield instilled fear in his enemies. His presence was a significant morale booster for the Greek warriors. Achilles' most notable traits were his legendary combat skills and extraordinary fighting abilities. However, the most crucial factor in his effectiveness was his rage. You'll see more clearly how his anger influenced the war as we progress through the story. On the other hand, Hector was the hero of Troy and its defender. Hector was the son of King Priam and the bravest warrior of the city. Behind Troy's walls, Hector led a staunch defense with great resolve. Hector was known not only for his prowess on the battlefield, but also for his deep love and loyalty to the people of Troy. Hector's bravery in battle strengthened Troy's defenses. He was not just a warrior but also a leader and a father. He had a deep love for his wife, Andromache, and their young son, Astyanax. Hector's role in protecting Troy showed that he was not merely a participant in the war, but a hero fighting for the future of his city. The conflict between Achilles and Hector constituted some of the most dramatic and crucial moments of the Trojan War. Their battle represented not just a personal vendetta, but a clash between two different worlds. Achilles' rage and Hector's bravery determined the course of the war, and their stories became legendary moments in both the war and history. One day, the great duel between Hector and Achilles before the walls of Troy became a legendary episode. In this duel, Achilles' fury and Hector's bravery highlighted the complexity and human nature of the struggle. Hector's fight as Troy's hero and Achilles' battle driven by his rage and skills marked the significant moments of the war. The story of Achilles and Hector is not just about a war, it's also a legendary reflection of human nature. Anger, pride, and heroism. Their places in the epic narrative of the Trojan War symbolize the magnitude of their heroism and the war's profound significance. Dear listeners, the stories of these great heroes are the key to understanding the depths of the Trojan War and the grandeur of this epic. The tales of Achilles and Hector reveal the splendor of Troy and the importance of the war in human history. Now let's turn to the later stages of the war, explore how the stories of these great heroes continued, and see how the Trojan War came to its conclusion. Dear listeners, it's time to dive into the depths of the Trojan War and explore the strategies employed by both the Trojans and the Greeks. In this grand conflict, both sides used their intellect, strategic thinking, and combat skills to try to achieve victory. This aspect of the war shows us that the Trojan War was not just a battle, but also a struggle of wits. Let's delve into these great strategic maneuvers. In the early years of the Trojan War, both the Greeks and Trojans developed various strategies to determine the war's outcome. The Greek strategies included both naval and land battles. Central to their strategy was the siege of Troy. The Greeks aimed to leave the city vulnerable by tightly encircling it and attacking its weak points. The Greek naval power was a crucial part of the war. By controlling sea routes, they sought to cut off Troy's connection with the outside world. This strategy aimed to limit Troy's food and supply sources and force the city into submission. Additionally, Greek ships were used for surprise attacks from the sea. This naval strategy allowed the Greeks to discover and exploit weaknesses in Troy's defenses. On the other hand, the Trojans focused more on defense. The walls of Troy became the most significant defensive element of the war. These high and sturdy walls represented a great engineering achievement designed to protect the city. They enabled the Trojans to fend off Greek siege attempts. Inside the city, the defense systems were carefully planned to protect the settlement. The Trojans stayed behind their walls, defending the city against Greek assaults. One of the Trojans' strategic advantages was their city's high and robust walls. These fortifications strengthened Troy's defenses and made it difficult for the Greeks to capture the city. Additionally, the Trojans managed their resources and supplies within the city carefully, increasing their resilience against prolonged sieges. As the war progressed, both sides engaged in various tactical maneuvers. The Greeks conducted reconnaissance and attacks to identify and target Troy's weak points. They also made alliances with some of Troy's internal allies to weaken resistance within the city. In response, the Trojans developed various defensive strategies. They motivated and supported internal resistance to counter the Greek attacks. Additionally, they established effective defensive lines in some areas of Troy against Greek assaults. In conclusion, the strategies used in the Trojan War showcased the abilities of both the Greeks and Trojans to shape the course of the conflict. Both sides used their intelligence and strategic thinking to strive for victory in the challenging conditions of the war. These grand strategic battles demonstrated that the war was not only a physical struggle but also a mental one. Dear listeners, the strategic aspects of the Trojan War reveal how complex and intelligent this great conflict was. Now let's explore how these strategies were implemented, what kinds of outcomes they produced in the later stages of the war, and how they influenced the fate of the Trojan War. Together, we'll examine how these strategic maneuvers impacted the final stages of the war and shaped its outcome. Dear listeners, we are now about to embark on a journey through the most dramatic and decisive moments of the Trojan War. As I narrate this section, imagine me closing my eyes and thinking back as if I were a warrior from ancient times. In these moments of war, filled with blood and tears but also woven with heroism, I deeply feel both the pain and the hope. It is during these pivotal moments that Hector's death and Patroclus's quest for vengeance completely altered the course of the Trojan War. This period of the war was when the Greeks and Trojans engaged in their most brutal conflicts. The Trojan War was shaped by both heroes and gods. At this point, the two great heroes of the war, Hector and Patroclus, made their mark on the most critical moments of the battle. Hector was known as Troy's bravest and most skilled warrior. He was a great leader, an excellent fighter, and most importantly, the protector of Troy. Hector's battles took place within the walls of Troy, under the Greek siege. His fight was the backbone of Troy's defense. However, during this phase of the war, Hector faced increasing threats from Greek warriors. During this challenging time, Hector's brother Paris had been a catalyst for the war's beginning by abducting Helen. Now, as Hector fought to protect both Troy and his family, He faced a grave danger as the war neared its climax. Patroclus' story begins as Achilles' closest friend and comrade in arms. Achilles was a great hero who displayed his warrior skills in the Trojan War. However, he had withdrawn from battle for a time, which weakened the Greeks' position in the war. When Patroclus decided to fight in Achilles' place, this brave act set off a series of events that would change the course of the war. Patroclus observed that Hector was defending Troy's walls, and that the Greeks were struggling to breach them. He courageously decided to fight Hector. This bold move drew Hector's attention, and a battle between the two heroes ensued. Patroclus showed courage and skill in his fight with Hector, but unfortunately he met his end at Hector's sword. Following Patroclus' death, Achilles' rage and grief grew like a storm. Achilles vowed revenge for the death of his closest friend and comrade. His fury would alter the course of the Trojan War and lead to a significant confrontation towards the end of the conflict. Achilles' decision to confront Hector for Patroclus' revenge marked a crucial moment that influenced the war's fate. The epic duel between Achilles and Hector became one of the war's climax points. Achilles defeated Hector with great bravery and anger, leading to Hector's death. This event became a turning point in the Trojan War, marking a key moment that affected the outcome of the conflict. Hector's death significantly weakened Troy's defense and boosted the morale of the Greeks. Achilles' revenge determined both the war's and Troy's fate. Patroclus' quest for vengeance showcased how Achilles emerged as a hero in the later stages of the war and the impact he made as the war approached its conclusion. Dear listeners, these pivotal moments of the Trojan War reveal both the heroic and tragic aspects of the conflict. The struggles of Hector and Patroclus illustrate that the war was not just a clash but also a grand narrative of heroism and tragedy. As we approach the end of the Trojan War, let's take a step-by-step look at the outcomes of this legendary struggle and move towards the ultimate conclusion of the conflict. Dear listeners, now I will take you to the final great drama of the Trojan War, the Trojan Horse deception, and the fall of Troy. This event, one of the greatest intellectual maneuvers in history, marked both the end of the war and the collapse of a great city. The story has become one of the most striking examples of clever and cunning strategies from ancient times. Let's dive into the depths of this epic event and explore the story behind the great trick that brought about Troy's end. Throughout the long years of the war, the besieged city of Troy was surrounded by Greek forces. Greek soldiers faced immense difficulties in breaching Troy's walls, which created the fear that the war might drag on forever. Greek commanders had to find a way to overcome Troy's defenses and capture the city. T is WS where the famous Trojan Horse trick came into play. The Trojan Horse was a brilliant idea conceived by the Greek strategist Odysseus. Known for his intelligence and ambition, Odysseus, along with other Greek leaders, developed an extraordinary plan to bring down Troy. Their plan involved constructing a massive wooden horse and secretly hiding Greek soldiers inside it to infiltrate the city's walls. Here's how Odysseus' plan worked. The Greeks built a large wooden horse and placed it in front of Troy's walls. The giant wooden horse was seen by the Trojans as a sign that the Greeks had lost the war and retreated. Believing the Greeks had withdrawn, the Trojans brought the wooden horse into the city and placed it in the town square, eager to celebrate their victory. However, no one knew that the wooden horse was hiding a group of elite Greek soldiers inside. As night fell, the seemingly vulnerable Troy offered a perfect opportunity for the Greek soldiers. The soldiers hidden inside the wooden horse emerged and made their way to the heart of the city. While the Trojans celebrated their victory and the city's freedom, the Greek soldiers quietly emerged and opened the city gates. Taking advantage of Troy's defenselessness, the Greeks entered the city and managed to capture it from within. This sudden and unexpected attack plunged the Trojans into shock and panic. The fall of Troy led to a tremendous tragedy. The city, long besieged and defenseless, was subjected to horrific destruction. The Greek soldiers looted the city, bringing Troy's history to an end. The beautiful and magnificent structures of Troy were demolished by the ravages of war. The city was left in ruin and despair, and its heroes and people were erased from the stage of history. The Trojan horse trick is not just a military strategy, but a symbol of human intelligence and cunning. This plan showcased how strategic thinking and creative ingenuity could change the course of a war. The Trojan horse has been remembered for centuries as one of the most well-known examples of military tactics and one of the cleverest deceptions in history. Dear listeners, the Trojan horse trick and the fall of Troy are among the greatest and most impressive stories in our history. This event represents not only the end of a war, but also a significant turning point in human history. As we approach the end of the war, the fall of Troy and the Greek victory mark the final points of this epic tale. Now it's time to wander among the ruins of Troy in history books and feel the echoes of this legendary event. Dear listeners, now I will take you on a journey through the long and arduous travels of the heroes after the Trojan War, especially focusing on the famous journey of Odysseus. After the destruction of Troy, the return journeys of the Greek heroes involved not just the physical challenges of war, but also their spiritual and emotional struggles. These stories have become a significant part of both mythology and literature throughout history. Get ready, because these journeys promise to dive deep into both heroism and tragedy. After the end of the war, the real challenge for the Greek commanders who had conquered Troy began on their journey home. Each faced various dangers and the vivid influence of the gods while confronting their own destinies. Among these return journeys, the most famous is undoubtedly that of Odysseus. Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey, details this epic journey, its challenges, and the hero's internal struggles. Odysseus's journey home is like a chain of epic tales. After leaving Troy, he embarks on a series of extraordinary adventures to get back home. However, his journey is filled with traps and obstacles. Despite the protection of the goddess Athena, Odysseus cannot escape the wrath of Poseidon. This anger makes his journey long and troublesome. The adventures Odysseus experiences carry deep meaning both mythologically and literarily. Firstly, one of the major challenges Odysseus faces is the Cyclops Polyphemus. This giant traps Odysseus and his men on his island. However, thanks to Odysseus's cleverness and strategic skills, he manages to deceive Polyphemus and escape. This event demonstrates Odysseus's courage and cunning and reflects his struggle against the wrath of the gods and nature. Another important stop is the island of the enchantress Circe. Circe transforms Odysseus's men into pigs, but with the help of a magical potion given by Hermes, Odysseus breaks Circe's spell and recovers his men. This episode shows that the hero is engaged in not only a physical battle but also a spiritual and emotional struggle. Odysseus's journey continues with a visit to the underworld. There he encounters old friends and heroes in the realm of the dead, confronts the shadows of the past, and receives prophecies about the future. This visit highlights both Odysseus's internal conflicts and the mythological themes exploring the boundary between life and death. On his return to Ithaca, Odysseus faces the greatest challenge of all, the devastating situation he encounters upon his arrival home. His palace, marriage, and kingdom are threatened by a group of rebels who have taken over his home. This part of the story can be seen as a struggle to reclaim his kingdom, showcasing Odysseus's strategic abilities and leadership once again. The return journeys of the Greek commanders are not just about coming home, but also symbolize heroism and personal growth. These journeys include each hero's internal battles, personal victories, and losses. The long and difficult travels following the fall of Troy offer important insights into the depths of the human spirit from both literary and mythological perspectives. Dear listeners, these return journeys of the heroes tell a story of both personal and cultural transformation. After the destruction of Troy, these journeys allowed the heroes and mythological figures to explore their inner worlds. Each adventure reveals not just the surface of war and heroism, but also deeper spiritual and emotional dimensions. These long journeys help us understand the mythological impact of the Trojan War and the transformation processes in the lives of the heroes. Dear listeners, now I will take you into the depths of an ancient legend and myth, exploring the impact of the Trojan War on Greek mythology. The Trojan War is not just a historical event, but also a cornerstone of Greek mythology. The mythological effects of this war have echoed widely in ancient Greek culture and Western literature, shaping many legends and stories around this grand conflict. Let's delve into the mythological legacy of the Trojan War and see how this legend has been narrated and left its mark over the centuries. The Trojan War is one of the greatest and most complex stories in Greek mythology. This war reflects the deep and intricate relationships between Greek gods and heroes, the tales of heroism, and the extremes of human condition. The war itself is not merely a siege of a city, but a drama that deeply affects the lives of gods, heroes, and humans. The place of the Trojan War in mythology begins with Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. This epic does not only cover the surface of the war, but also delves into the internal conflicts, emotions, and anger of the gods and heroes. Homer presents the Trojan War as a story of heroism and tragedy, detailing the conflicts among heroes and the interventions of the gods. The characters in the Iliad reveal the mythological dimensions of the war and the ways the gods interfere in human lives. Gods like Athena, Apollo, and Zeus play active roles in this war, providing crucial insights into the depths of mythology. The Trojan War also deeply explores the concepts of heroism and fate, which are fundamental themes in Greek mythology. Figures such as Achilles, Hector, Paris, and others are central to these myths. Achilles' rage, Hector's bravery, Paris's fate, all these characters are at the heart of the mythological narrative and highlight the profound aspects of the Trojan War. These heroes represent not only the war, but also the internal struggles they face against divine will and human condition. The trick of the Trojan horse at the end of the war is portrayed as one of the most impressive examples of strategic intelligence in mythology. This trick is seen not only as a military strategy, but also as a game of the gods. Odysseus's clever plan elevates the values of intelligence and cunning in mythology. The impact of the Trojan horse story reflects both the complexity and depth of the war in Greek mythology. The effects of the Trojan War extend beyond Greek mythology and have had a significant impact on Western literature as well. This war features in the works of many writers, from Shakespeare to Virgil, Goethe to James Joyce. The epic of Troy has been processed in different ways over various periods, with each writer and poet offering their own interpretation. Historically, the mythological effects of the Trojan War show how important it was in ancient Greek culture to contemplate heroism, divine intervention, and the human condition. The war is not just an event, but a narrative that deeply explores human condition, divine fate, and heroism. Dear listeners, the impact of the Trojan War on Greek mythology helps us better understand the historical and cultural significance of this great conflict. These effects show how the stories of gods and humans intertwine, and how heroism and tragedy are elevated and processed. The legend of Troy has remained a cornerstone of both mythology and literature throughout history. This mythological heritage offers us a valuable perspective on the depths of ancient times and how the legend of this great war has been preserved. Dear friends, as we approach the end of one of the most epic and intriguing events in our history, the Trojan War, I am delighted to have had the chance to explore this legendary story with you. Now it's time to bid farewell as this great journey concludes. The Trojan War is not just a conflict, but one of the greatest legends in human history. This war offers a tale where heroism and tragedy intertwine. The trick of the Trojan horse, Hector's brave resistance, and Odysseus's long journey are key components of this epic. These stories not only reveal the depths of ancient Greek mythology, but also showcase the resilience and dedication of the human spirit. In this journey, we have examined the details of Troy's destruction and the heroes' return journeys, the legendary remnants of Troy, the struggles of the heroes, and the mythological elements all remind us of how rich and fascinating our history is. Each character, each event has left a mark in both the real and mythological worlds, offering us deep insights into lived experiences and legends. I am immensely grateful for the opportunity to share this story from the depths of ancient times with you. The Epic of Troy shows us how we can blend history and mythology and keep the legends of the past alive. The adventures of the heroes of Troy are not just a significant part of history, but also of human history itself. Dear friends, as we complete this in-depth exploration of the legends and heroes of the Trojan War, it's time to say goodbye. But remember, history always takes us to the depths of the past and offers us new stories. The adventures of the heroes of Troy provide us not only with history, but also examples of humanity's great struggles. In our next episode, we will embark on a journey to another depth of history, to another legend. As always, it is an honor to share this journey with you. Until we meet again in these captivating tales of history, I bid you farewell. Goodbye, dear friends, and continue to embark on unforgettable journeys through the depths of history. See you in the next story.